Two. Okay, folks, let's move on along, and we're going to finish up chapter 9 on international marketing. And talking to my dad, by the way, and he was telling me that he gets trade journals still. He was telling me that the Suez Canal fiasco, it may take 3 months for them to be able to get rid of the backlog of vessels that are in the Suez right now. So incredible. All right. So when last we met, we were talking about channels in an international context. And the important thing to realize, especially when we're talking about channels and we're talking about it overseas, is that because we're talking about significant differences in understanding not only just simple differences, but differences also in culturally, politically, so many different things, there definitely needs to be some organizations there to help individuals to move goods back and forth. The international markets need middlemen, okay? They need middlemen who understand the logistics and the paperwork that's required to work in a given country, to be able to adhere to the regulations and to understand and find customers for their particular items. And so we talked about one of them, and we're going to talk about another one, 2 corporations that kind of help you out. One of them is known as an export management company, all right? Now, the next one I'm going to talk about is called an export trading company, and many times they're used interchangeably, and I'm going to tell you what the difference is, okay? So the export management company, what they do is they provide all of the necessary marketing for you to be able to find companies to be able to sell, or excuse me, consumers to sell your products to overseas. They do all of the necessary things. They do the marketing research for you, the development of the business, the logistics, the credit payment, all of those things to be able for you to distribute your goods in a different country. Not only do you go to them, not only do customers seek you, but they go out and seek others as well. And so they will advertise their services for anyone who wants to be able to go to another country to be able to ply their wares. They usually have experience in one or more particular countries, and usually they have experience with a particular product or a kind of product. And so they may be in the industrial trades, they may be into overseas manufacturing, they could be into garments, those particular things that are unique to a given specific industry. They generally do not take on things beyond that, beyond their own areas. Now, they don't necessarily invest in products themselves. They, in essence, are the light middle person. They are the individuals who provide, as I said, all of the necessary marketing features, but they themselves don't get into the movement from raw materials into the final assemblies. They generally are small businesses, and I say small business relative speaking. I mean, there can be large corporations, but not in terms of the gigantic multinationals that you might think of. And one of the also things is that their efforts have to be monitored because there's always the possibility of some brand erosion. How they make their business, by the way, is usually a percentage of profit, 10 to 15%. And that's actually not a bad way of doing it. So if you make $1 million, let's say, in doing your particular jobs, they would take a 10 to 15% cut of your profits. And a cut of the net profit is actually a very reasonable way to do it. It means that, of course, there has to be a certain amount of openness in the books to make sure that you are achieving a particular profit goal. So that's important. But that's generally how they work. And as I said before, their efforts need to be monitored. Now, to kind of give you an idea of the other one, there are export trade companies. Now, as I said, they tend to use the same words interchangeably, and they could be almost considered close cousins, but they're not. For the purposes for your definitions, and especially if you're looking for tests, an export management corporation or company is concerned mostly or practically all with the marketing, okay? An export trading company gets into the overall operations, more than just marketing. They have to do with the chasing down of raw materials, sub-assembly works. They even do the finished goods. They work on various products in the broadest sense. They have a very rich history in Japan where you have the keiritsu, which is the close connections between corporations. And the examples that they have here are Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Shimoto, all of these corporations. And think of them also in a vertical integration. They do processing, manufacturing, transportation of operations across border areas. And so that kind of gives you a broader idea of what they do. They go beyond trying to sell your products, and that they actually help in the operations of moving goods back and forth overseas. So just to show you a couple of things to help you picture this in your mind. If I am, let's see. I think that's, let's see. So this is an example of a EMC and EMC. So they are an export management corporation. And if you kind of look at it, you can see, yeah, these people are marketing mostly. And so they come up with your export strategy, agents and distributors to help you. They'll help you in sales, assist you in purchasing. They do market research for you. I mean, those are classic examples of what you would consider, consider a marketing corporation to do. And if you kind of look over here, it's a little bit deeper. They talk about, see, they find you the right company. They do marketing research. That's the classic. You're worth a marketing company when they start that way. They try to find you the right distributors in the countries, and then hopefully find managers who can do the job or help you there, and then ultimately with expansion. And so this is exactly what you would think an EMC would be. An export trading company, this is just a more generic discussion about it. And this is a company that specializes in exporting. But if you notice, it's a little bit step beyond that, okay? They also talk about the insuring and the shipping. Of course, that would be a marketing thing if you're talking about channels. But it's a broader kind of dealing or closely associating with the operations of your company. They do information extraction, they do training, which is another thing that you find that they do. So they help with the government laws and regulations of working into that company. As I said before, they do training costs. Here's something also that they will do is that they closely monitor exchange rates, and they will help you to repatriate your funds, okay, it is the most profitable way possible. So that's an example, really getting into it. So the difficulty with export trading companies is because they tend to be all encompassing, all right? They tend to take over, most of the operations and the movement of the goods. And so if you're a company, you might lose control of the operations. Generally also is that they may not necessarily have as the adept knowledge in their particular field, and that they may have necessarily bad reputations as well. And so this is just kind of to give you an idea. Remember in your mind, export management corporations are marketing, and export trading corporations are much broader. They help to deal with the day-to-day operations of the company itself. Okay, so moving right along. With all of these other ways in which we can get goods to be shipped overseas, there's another way that we can have goods be handled into another country. And depending on the situation, you've got to have a few things in place, but you could be available for what's known as piggybacking. So what's piggybacking? Okay. If I am a corporation and I am looking to take my products somewhere else, I might be looking for a partner who's in a similar industry, who has customers that I would like to deal with, but they don't sell your particular line of goods to those customers. So an example would be this: if I were Merck or Pfizer, one of the big pharma corporations, and if you think about them, generally they deal with exactly what I said, pharmaceuticals. So I have these branches, or I have these distributing to, the Walgreens and to the Rite Aids and those kind of places, and those do good. But however, let's say I don't consider that to be the total broad expanse of health goods for consumers. Let's say I'm a corporation from India, and the Indian corporation has holistic medicines, ginsengs, teas, herbal teas, those kind of things that tend to be not, strictly what you would consider in the category of pharmaceuticals, but these are health goods that happen to be, what is, like off, let's just not say in what's considered the most strict sense of a pharmaceutical. However, these are goods that consumers want. I can't provide them, so they're getting them from somewhere else. And so this is what piggybacking would do. It would allow a corporation to use the distribution channels of another corporation. And generally this is done across international boundaries as well. And so in this example, all right, if I were a company, as I said, like one in India, amazing, it's snowing, man, April 1st. So I'm a corporation in India, and I do holistic medicines. I'm looking to get into the United States. I don't have perhaps maybe the money or the ability to get into the channels into US. However, I do have access, and I do have a partnership with, let's say, Pfizer. I can provide them my product line. Pfizer basically ships those goods in. They take care of all of the processing and the fees and all of those other things. They get those goods stocked on shelves. They do all of the channels of distribution. And what I pay them is some fee for those particular products being on those shelves. Now look what it does for Pfizer. It broadens their product line. They have more than one thing that they can sell. There are no conflicts of interest between them, because they may not be selling those kinds of goods to the consumers. It's not anything on their product list that they're competing against. and they have a similar customer base. And so this is what piggybacking is. When one corporation uses the channels of distribution of another corporation, generally across international or country boundaries, okay? So that's piggybacking. There is also what is known as reciprocal piggybacking. And yes, these are going to be test questions. Reciprocal piggybacking. What reciprocal piggybacking is when two corporations get together and they use each other's channels of distribution. So the same things, the same laws apply. There's no necessarily conflict of interest. They say they do have the same customer base, but actually there's reciprocity. In other words, they can actually help each other out. And so here's an example. In the 90s, when the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers came, oh boy, my son was in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. He was 5 years old, and I'll never forget, I bought him something for Christmas. I am not kidding you. I had 500 stickers to put on those things. It was like from midnight to 5 a.m. putting stickers on them. Anyway, going on. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers exploded on television, and it needed a way into the United States. They did not have, they could eventually find their way into the US. There's no doubt about that. But Christmas is coming up. They needed to shorten the distance so that they could get into the US. And so what Bandai does, Bandai is the toy manufacturer in Japan, they come knocking on the door of Mattel in the United States. And they say, look, we're desperate. We need to be able to come into the US. Would you handle the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers product line for us? And Mattel comes in and says, funny you should say that, because you know what? We can work out a deal. We've been trying to get into the Far East market for decades, and we haven't been able to do it in an equitable fashion. So this is what happened. Bandai used the channels of distribution of Mattel into the United States, and that gave them trading venues into North and South America. Mattel, by the very same notion, used Bandai's channels of distribution so that they could get into Japan and South Korea and into East Asia and into New Zealand and into Australia. Win-win situation on both sides. And that's what reciprocal piggybacking is. It's not only when one channel uses the distribution of another channel, but it's when two distributors use each other's channel, okay? So piggyback, it works, it's great. When the pieces fit together, it's desirable, win-win situation. Okay, so along with internationals shipping back and forth, instead of just having products at the very top end of channel distribution, we actually have retailers that need to expand as well, all right? And so international retailers, yes, the question is, should retailers go international? And I should say that the larger ones absolutely have to find a way in. There's no doubt about it, all right? For several reasons. If you look at what is considered the industrialized world, growth in home markets has been slow. The foreign markets are attractive, and basically they're what is known as the developing countries. And so if you look at Eastern Europe, which has, for the last 30 years, thrown off communism. If you look at South America, you look at Africa, these emerging nations that are all of a sudden, are starting to finally get their wheels under them and start to have a great amount of growth. You find from 2000 to 2015 and on is that the retail sales growth in those particular countries has tripled. And it's twice what the developed markets have been. And the reasons that you want to go overseas is that you create what's known as the virtuous cycle. And so what it means is that your investments into these developed countries, when done right, developing countries, when it's done right, it can become successful because it creates its own success. So as I develop into other countries, these are some of the things that I get. As I get growth and I move in other countries, I have better economies of scale. So I'm selling more. So I'm starting to get, let's just say, more substantial discounts than I had before. That also means that with greater discounts, it means that I have greater spending power, which I could put into research and financing and IT, those kind of things. And what also can happen is that once I take and I develop a place where things can be sold, that means products that are sold in your particular region can find their way to the shelves in other nations as well. And so what it means to me also as a manufacturer is that if I can't do the things that I want through an EMC or through an ETC, or I don't have the piggybacking, I can sell my goods through a retailer such as a Walmart, and those goods can find their way overseas through an existing channel system. And it means that I don't have to do all of those other investments as well. The last thing that I do is that because I expand internationally, it means that I have an enhanced brand equity, that I am an international player, and that also helps as well to expand my credibility. And so this is what's known as the virtuous cycle. So having said that, retail overseas is difficult, and it does lag behind some other industries for many reasons. The first is, if you think about it, developed countries are very developed, all right? And even the developing countries are basic societies and civilizations that have been around for thousands of years. I mean, it's easy to think in the United States, for us, a city that's 100 years old or 150 years old is old to us, and yet that's very young when you compare it to the rest of the world. And so many of the high quality locations have long before been taken up, where retail can't expand to. Now, just think about that as the infrastructure, the strength of the channels of distribution in the United States, and we have some of the most incredible logistics in the US that you can imagine. The success that we had in major conflicts, a lot of it has to do with our abilities to move goods as quickly as possible. And whether or not you have those comparable logistics is sometimes problematic at best. And not only that, but we move things in the United States very differently than they move things overseas as well. In the United States, commercial movement is done predominantly by rail in the US. And of course, we do have trucks. But you find that in Europe and in East Asia, most of those goods are usually, many times, are shipped by trucks, and where they ship passengers by rail. Just one of those things. The need for the suppliers that you have at home to have those same suppliers overseas can be problematic at best. You don't have that same group. There are differences in the way that we operate, quite simply because of regulations. Goods may be tariffed, they may be kept before they are released. That's also something that can happen. So they can be impounded for extended periods of time. And all of those things can be detriments when you're trying to expand. And, you know, also finding those products that are attractive here that might be attractive abroad. The marketing is one of those things. Mature goods in the United States may be introductory goods elsewhere, And so the marketing needs to be more introductory, but also understanding the countries that you're trying to expand into can be a major problem. And then last, the barriers of entry. I mean, these can be political, they can also be governmental. All of these things are things that make it difficult for you to expand. I wanted to just briefly show you, now, after NAFTA, the regulations to expand to, let's say, Mexico have broadly kind of decreased. But I just wanted to show you some of the things that you would need to do just to open a business in Mexico. And so you need to submit a request to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You need to draft the Constitutive Act. You would need to register with the Tax Administrative Service, register with the Public Registry of Property and Commerce, register with the Mexican Institute of Social Security. Now, generally, you could hire firms to do all of this, but to understand the minutia of what it takes to be able to successfully do business in another country takes experts, and it takes time, and it takes money. And all of these things can be considered barriers of entry. And let me also say this, if you're competing against something that is considered homegrown in those locations, that in itself can create a barrier of entry. True. One of the difficulties that America has had trying to expand our goods into Japan has been this quite simple dedication that the Japanese have to buy their own goods. And not that there's been any barriers there, but barriers just that are inherent in the way that their society runs. And so some of the retailers that have struggled to go international, so Tiffany's, Costco, Home Depot, they've had their Chinese operations completely closed. Walmart couldn't make it in Argentina for a couple of reasons. It's wild. Argentina uses 220 volt outlets, and of course America is 110. So just the infrastructure was something that they struggled with. The United States, the cuts of beef that you have in the US are dramatically different. Here's an interesting thing. The taste in the United States for chicken is different from the rest of the world. So American, if you go to McDonald's or you go anywhere and you buy chicken or chicken nuggets, that's it's white meat. All of it is. The chicken breasts, all of those other things are all white meat. Well, the rest of the world prefers dark meat. I prefer dark meat too. There is a gigantic logistic train all across the United States of chicken that is processed in the US, and the white meat stays in the United States, and the rest of the dark meat gets shipped everywhere else, believe it or not. Well, going along with that same thing, there are not only different cuts of beef, but cuts of chicken as well. I mean, I've eaten fried chicken in South Korea, and they don't have the pieces in the traditional ways that we might think. Just small things like that. You just find that there are barriers that come just in the very basic way that we do operations in the United States that create difficulties when you're trying to go overseas. When I was in South Korea, I went to their Walmart, I think it was called +4. And the Walmart there, it's interesting because it was 5 stories high. And it was not, of course, it was not as big as a Walmart here is, because the geographic footprint that a Walmart has here on one floor is impossible in a South Korea. So it's the same size, but it's 5 stories big. Fascinating. They've actually got an escalator for you to put your buggies on. It locks in magnetically and it goes to the second floor. Anyway, the foods that they sold there in the meat section, the beef is quite good. Let me tell you, it's expensive. But the other thing is that two-thirds of their meat diet tends to be in fish, squid, and shrimp, and crawfish too, those kind of things. And so the differences there are just differences that have to be understood in order to sell competitively there. So here's some of the final factors that for success, you have to deliver unique benefits while accommodating the local markets. You have to realize this is that you have to compete with local retailers, but you can't drive them out of business, all right? Or let's just say it's just being a bad neighbor, all right? You often coexist with them right next door to each other. You're competitive with them, but to drive them out of business is more than just simply business as usual as we see in the United States. It's being a bad neighbor as well. You just realize that international competition tends to be the norm. So the last to discuss is in franchising. Franchising is very successful overseas, but that's only been in the last 20 years or so, because franchising is more of an American idea. It's something that we understand, and it's taken a while for other countries to understand it, and then also to find ways of making contracts that are binding across country boundaries. There's a lack of a legal precedent there of forcing a franchise, enforcing contracts across global boundaries. And it took a certain amount of expertise to get this, to come up with some kind of agreement for there to be franchising to exist as it does now. But yes, franchising is very successful, and franchising exists with a little bit of a twist, all right? And so you actually find 4 kinds of franchising strategies, all right? The first is direct franchising. And this is traditional franchising as we know it. And so this is where you have a franchisor and a franchisee. And they operate a franchise within a country. And just like in the United States, you would have different franchisees that would open up in that given country, okay? And so that would be the first is it's direct franchising. It's the traditional mold. The next one is what's known as area development. Area development franchising. Okay, so let's look at what this is. It's almost reverse colonialism, if we can actually believe that. So this is what area development franchising is. So this would be the country. You have a franchisor here. And then this would be the country. And so what a franchisor would say is they'd section off a piece of the country, and they would have a franchisee. And what they would say is, you have 1/3 of this particular country in which you can develop your franchises. You can have as many franchises in this area as you want to. You have exclusive rights to be able to create as many of those as you wish. And so this is what an area development franchise is. It's multi-unit franchising over a given geographic area. Usually it tends to be time-based. And so it's generally like a 10-year contract that you're given to be able to develop this area. Of course, those contracts tend to be renewable, so that after like 10 years, you could basically move on again. You find this a lot in Russia. You also find the master franchising model as well, okay? So this is area development franchising. One franchisee is given a geographic area in which they develop over a limited amount of time. The next is what's known as master franchising. Master franchising, and this is a twist on those ideas. Once again, it just all depends on which is the better way of doing it. And so with master franchising, this is what you do. Once again, we have our country, we have our franchisor, let's say in the United States, and we have this franchisee. Okay. And so this franchisee in this country can do multi-unit franchising just like they want. However, this franchisee has a twist. The franchisee can also recruit franchisees under them. And so what happens is the franchisee, in essence, becomes the regional franchisor. And so they act as an agent for the original franchise. They can build their own. They can license franchises under them. These individuals can also do multi-unit franchising. The franchisees give some money to them, or let's just say of the money that they give, some money goes to them. And of course, more money goes up to the top. And so what you have is you have a franchisee of a given geographic area that can recruit sub-franchisees, okay? This is a better model for rapid growth. It also leans more heavily on the regional knowledge of this master franchisor who knows the sub-franchisees under them, and it is a successful model. The last one is what's known as a joint venture direct franchise. And so how this one works, under a joint venture direct franchise, let us say that for particular reasons that the regulations and the understandings of the business, for whatever reasons, basically do not allow for any of the other three models to be successful. What you have in the joint venture is exactly what it sounds like. It's when two corporations come together to form a third company, and this company is the franchisee to the major corporation or to the major franchisor. And so an example of this is when Starbucks, who say they never franchise until they do, when Starbucks was coming out and wanting to be able to expand into India, the barriers were such for their particular instances that none of the other ways that they wanted to go into the country they could achieve quickly or they could achieve economically. And so what they did is they created a joint venture with Tata, T-A-T-A, and I'm not even sure how to pronounce it right, but Tata, they did a joint venture with them, created a third corporation, and that third corporation was a franchisee of Starbucks. And so that was a way that they were able to do it. Is anyone better than the other? No, the answer is that all of these are models that were based on difficulties that needed to be overcome, and they found ways of overcoming them, and they achieved a reasonable amount of success. Is any of those ways, one way or another, better than the other? And the answer is no, because all of these are just basic ways in which you're hopefully achieving some way of doing channels across international boundaries where there are significant barriers that need to be overcome, whether those barriers are legal, whether they're political, whether they're geographic, physical barriers, whether they're cultural barriers. All of these are ways in which corporations and products can successfully sell their wares somewhere else. Okay, we're done for today. Okay, one other thing just to let you know, if we look on the website now, you'll notice that we have adjusted for the test next week to be on Thursday. And so if you go online and you look, you'll see that the test is going to be April 8th through 9th, because you'll do the test on Friday if you want to, chapters 6, 7, and 8, and 9. And position paper 2 is due on April 6th instead of today, okay? So without further ado, I hope you have a great Easter break. Be safe, have fun, and I will speak at you on Tuesday. So take care.
Thank you, Dr. Shows.
Thank you. Have a happy Easter.
You too. Thank you.